The white hospital lights buzzed overhead, stinging my eyes as I slowly forced them open, only to see Sienna holding out a folder of divorce papers. The hum of the heart monitor was a dull, rhythmic beep in my ears, and my head felt like it had been cracked open with a heavy steel hammer. The memory of the crash was still a chaotic blur of rain-slicked asphalt, blinding high beams, the terrifying screech of tires, and the crushing sound of metal folding in on itself. I had barely survived the impact. But Sienna didn't ask how I felt. She didn't look at the thick white bandages wrapped tightly around my forehead, or the dark purple bruises covering my forearms. She just stood there by the bed, her face a cold, beautiful mask of absolute indifference, pointing at the signature line with a sharp, manicured finger. "Sign it, Adrian," she said, her voice completely flat, without a single hint of warmth or concern. "I don't have time for your drama anymore. Gavin is waiting for me downstairs in the lobby. We have a major press event in less than an hour, and I cannot afford to be late." A sharp, throbbing pain split my skull, but my mind was suddenly, chillingly clear. I looked at the legal papers, then at the woman I had spent 3 long, agonizing years desperately chasing, begging for even a scrap of her affection, and I smiled. Without saying a single word, I reached out my trembling hand, grabbed the cheap plastic pen from the bedside table, and signed my name on the dotted line with a firm, steady hand. Sienna's hand shook slightly as she snatched the folder back, her blue eyes widening in sudden, quiet shock, as if she was waiting for the tears, the begging, the desperate screaming she was so used to receiving from me. But I only closed my eyes and turned my face away from her, completely done with her. My mind was in a strange, detached state. The impact of the car crash had done something profound to my brain. As I lay in that sterile room, smelling of cheap bleach, harsh antiseptic, and rubbing alcohol, a bizarre realization washed over me. I wasn't the Adrian who had spent years acting like a pathetic, obsessed puppy for Sienna Carter. No. I felt like a transmigrator. I believed, with absolute certainty, that I had somehow woken up in the body of a tragic villain in a cliché romance novel. In the original plot of this story, Adrian was destined to go mad with jealousy, harass Sienna, try to ruin her rising career, and eventually meet a gruesome, lonely end in a dark alley. If I wanted to survive, I had to change my fate. I had to let her go. I had to run as far away from her and her precious first love, Gavin, as possible. So when she handed me those papers, it wasn't a tragedy, it was my golden ticket to a quiet, peaceful freedom. Sienna stood by the bed for a long moment, her expensive designer coat draped over her shoulders. She looked completely out of place in this cheap, cramped public hospital room. She was the metropolis's golden girl, a superstar actress on the rise, and I was just the quiet, hidden husband she kept in the shadows to protect her pristine public image. She frowned, tapping her high heels impatiently against the linoleum floor. "Is this another one of your pathetic games, Adrian?" she asked, her voice dripping with annoyance. "Do you think that by acting cold and signing so easily, I will feel guilty? We both know you can't live without me. You'll be calling my phone by midnight, crying and apologizing for signing this, begging me to take you back. Just stop the act. It's childish." I didn't answer. I didn't even turn my head to look at her. I just stared at the beige ceiling, watching a small crack in the plaster. The silence in the room stretched out, thick, cold, and heavy. For 3 years, I would have done anything to get her to look at me like this, even if it was with anger. Now, I felt absolutely nothing. The obsession was gone, replaced by a cool, soothing empty space. Sienna waited, her breathing growing slightly faster and shallower as the seconds ticked by. When she finally realized I wasn't going to reply, her face twisted in a mixture of anger, frustration, and deep confusion. She clutched the signed divorce folder tightly to her chest, turned on her heel, and marched out of the room. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing off the walls like a gunshot. I let out a long, slow breath, and closed my eyes to rest. I was finally free from the script. The discharge process was quiet and lonely. I walked out of the hospital 3 days later, carrying nothing but a small plastic bag with my personal clothes and my old phone. The nurse at the front desk didn't even look up as she handed me my discharge forms, her fingers tapping away on her keyboard. I signed the paperwork, walked through the heavy glass doors, and stepped out onto the busy city streets. The afternoon sun was bright, warming my face as I stood on the pavement. I took a deep, clear breath, tasting the exhaust fumes, the distant smell of roasted nuts from a street vendor, and the cool city air. It felt amazing to be alive, free from the suffocating weight of my past life. I walked down to the nearest subway station, pulling my phone from my pocket. The station was crowded, filled with people rushing to work, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded in my life. I stood on the platform, watching the bright headlights of the oncoming train cut through the dark tunnel. I boarded the train, finding a quiet corner to stand in. I opened my banking app, my fingers tapping the screen with curiosity. The settlement money was already there, a massive sum that Sienna's legal team had pushed on me to ensure my absolute silence. $5 million. They wanted to make sure I wouldn't go to the media and ruin her clean, single image. In the past, the old Adrian would have rejected every single penny, seeing it as an insult to his love. But I wasn't him anymore. I smiled and immediately transferred the funds to a private, secure account. This money was my fresh start, my shield against the world. I spent the next 2 weeks hiding from the world. I rented a beautiful, quiet apartment in the rainy northern district of the city, far away from the glitz and glamour of Sienna's social circles. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. It had large windows that looked out over a small, cobblestone alley and a single, sprawling oak tree. I spent my days buying simple, high-quality furniture, a good coffee machine, and a few books on gardening and cooking. I didn't check the news. I didn't look at social media. For the first time in years, my phone didn't ring with Sienna's cold demands or Gavin's smug, mocking text messages. I was a ghost in the city, and it was beautiful. One afternoon, I walked down to a small, hidden coffee shop at the end of my street. The air was cool, and a light drizzle was starting to fall, darkening the cobblestones. As I opened the door, the rich smell of roasted coffee beans and warm cinnamon wrapped around me. I ordered a black coffee and turned around to find a table, only to freeze. Sitting in the corner, holding a steaming mug, was a girl with straight, silver hair and sharp, red eyes. Eliza. My breath caught in my throat. She was my childhood friend, the only person who had stayed by my side when everyone else abandoned me for Sienna. But the old Adrian had pushed her away, angry that she didn't support his toxic obsession. Eliza looked up. When her eyes met mine, her mug stopped halfway to her lips. She stared at the bandages still visible near my hairline, her red eyes softening with a mixture of anger, relief, and deep concern. Adrian, she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. She set her mug down and stood up, her movements quick and urgent. She walked over to me, stopping just a foot away. What happened to you? I saw the news about the crash. I tried to call, but your phone was off. She looked at me, her fingers reaching out as if to touch my shoulder, but she pulled them back, hesitant. She was searching for the broken boy she used to know. I looked at her, seeing the genuine worry in her eyes, something I had never once seen in Sienna's. I smiled, a real, warm smile. Hey, Eliza, I said softly. It's good to see you. I'm okay, really. I'm sorry for everything. I was an idiot for pushing you away. She stared at me, surprised by my apology, then slowly nodded, a soft tear shining in her eye. Sit down, she said, her voice softening. Tell me everything. Eliza and I sat by the window for hours, the rain drumming a steady, soothing beat against the glass. The warmth of the coffee shop felt like a protective shield against the cold city outside. I told her everything, or at least, the version of everything she could understand. I told her Sienna and I were divorced, that I had taken the settlement, and that I was starting over. I didn't tell her about my transmigration delusion, she would have called a doctor. But she listened, her red eyes watching me closely, looking for any sign of the old, desperate Adrian. When she realized I was truly calm, she let out a long breath, a soft smile spreading across her lips. I've missed you, Adrian, she said quietly, her hand briefly touching mine. I'm glad you're back. I was so worried about you. But the peace didn't last. The next morning, I walked out of my apartment to buy groceries. The street was quiet, the cobblestones damp from the morning mist. The scent of rain and wet asphalt filled the air. I bought fresh flour, sugar, and yeast from the local grocery store. I wanted to bake some fresh bread, a simple, therapeutic process I had always loved but never had time for while managing Sienna's complex life. I loved the feeling of the flour on my hands, the steady, rhythmic kneading of the dough. It made me feel grounded, like a normal person who was allowed to have simple hobbies. As I turned the corner near a small park, a black luxury sedan pulled up to the curb, its engine idling with a low, silent purr. The door opened, and a man with slicked-back brown hair and sharp green eyes stepped out. Victor. Sienna's manager. He looked at my simple jacket and the grocery bag in my hand with clear disdain. Get in, Adrian, he said, his voice cold and commanding. We need to talk. Don't make a scene here on the street. I didn't move. I stood on the sidewalk, holding my groceries, my face blank. I have nothing to say to you, Victor, I replied. Victor's eyes narrowed. He walked up to me, stopping close enough that I could smell his strong cologne. Listen to me, boy, he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. Sienna is about to sign the biggest movie contract of her career. Gavin is her co-star, and the public loves them together. We paid you a lot of money to disappear. If you try to contact her, if you write one post online, or if you even look in her direction, I will personally destroy you. Do you understand? Gavin's father is a very powerful director, and we can make you look like a monster in the media. We can arrange stories about domestic abuse, financial manipulation, anything. We will erase you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, holding it out to me. Here is another 50,000. Take it. Consider it a bonus for keeping your mouth shut. Just make sure you stay in your hole. I looked at the envelope, then up at Victor's arrogant face. In the past, the old Adrian would have lost his mind, screaming about his love and throwing the money in Victor's face. But I just felt a mild sense of amusement. I saw him as a minor villain, a character in a book who was destined for failure. I didn't take the envelope. I looked Victor dead in the eye. Keep your money, Victor, I said, my voice quiet and steady. And tell Sienna, she doesn't exist to me anymore. Tell her Gavin can have her. I am already gone. Don't bother me again. I walked past him, leaving him standing on the damp sidewalk, his face pale with sudden anger. I didn't tell Eliza about the encounter. I didn't want to bring that poison into my new life. I wanted to protect her from that world. I went home, kneaded the bread dough, and enjoyed the quiet peace of my kitchen. Meanwhile, across the city, Sienna Carter was sitting in her massive penthouse apartment, staring at her phone. The room was beautiful, filled with expensive art, white marble counters, and looking out over the city skyline, but she felt a strange, cold emptiness. The silence in the penthouse was almost deafening. For the past 3 weeks, her phone had been completely silent. There were no frantic text messages, no long emails begging for forgiveness, no missed calls from Adrian. It was exactly what she had wanted. For years, she had complained to her friends about how suffocating Adrian's love was. She had told Gavin that Adrian was like a shadow she couldn't shake. But now that the shadow was gone, the light felt blinding and cold. She walked to the kitchen, looking at the high-end espresso machine. In the past, Adrian would have brewed her favorite herbal tea at exactly 7 a.m., making sure the temperature was perfect. Now, she had to make it herself, and it tasted like paper. Gavin walked into the living room, wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of wine. He smiled, his red hair perfectly styled. "What are you thinking about, babe?" he asked, sitting next to her and draping an arm over her shoulders. "Are you excited for the press conference tomorrow? The media is going to lose their minds when we announce our relationship." Sienna forced a smile, shifting slightly away from him. "Yes, of course," she said. But her mind was elsewhere. "Gavin, have you heard anything from Adrian?" Gavin let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Adrian? That loser? Why would I care? He probably spent all his settlement money on cheap booze and is crying in some dirty motel. Honestly, Sienna, you did him a favor. He's probably realized by now that he was never in your league. Why are you still thinking about him? He was just a leech." Sienna nodded, but Gavin's words didn't comfort her. She remembered the way Adrian had smiled in the hospital room when he signed the papers. It wasn't the smile of a broken man. It was the smile of someone who had just thrown away a piece of trash. A sudden, uncomfortable shiver ran down her spine. The next day, during the press conference, Sienna stood next to Gavin under the bright flashing lights. The room was packed with journalists, their cameras clicking rapidly. Gavin smiled for the cameras, holding her hand tightly. But when a reporter asked a question about Gavin's recent charity work, Gavin immediately started boasting, taking all the credit for a project that Sienna had actually funded, organized, and spent weeks planning. Sienna looked at him, a small frown touching her lips. In the past, Adrian had always stood in the background, working tirelessly to support her, never asking for credit, always making sure she shone brightest. Gavin, on the other hand, was constantly reaching for the spotlight, even if it meant stepping on her. She quickly brushed the thought away, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing. She called Victor that evening, asking if Adrian had tried to reach out. Victor lied, saying Adrian had taken the money and run. Sienna felt a hollow disappointment. She stared at the city skyline, feeling incredibly alone in the crowd. She remembered how Adrian used to hold her hand when she was nervous before events, his presence a calm anchor. Gavin was only interested in his own image, and the realization was beginning to hurt. She sat in the quiet penthouse, staring at the dark screen of her phone, waiting for a name that would never appear. She remembered how Adrian used to send her long messages of encouragement before every big show. He would say, "You're going to be amazing, Sienna. I'm right here." Now, she had Gavin, but she had never felt more isolated. She went to bed with a heavy heart, realizing that her clean, successful life was beginning to feel like a golden cage. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into a beautiful, peaceful routine. Eliza and I found a small, run-down commercial space on the corner of a quiet street in the Northern District. It had high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and a large, dusty window that let in the soft morning light. The lease was remarkably cheap because the place had been abandoned for years, filled with cobwebs, old cardboard boxes, and layers of thick gray dust. We decided to lease it together, combining our dreams. Eliza wanted a place to sell rare, vintage books, and I wanted a kitchen to bake fresh pastries and brew high-quality coffee. We spent 10 long, exhausting, but incredibly happy days cleaning the place. We scrubbed the grime off the brick walls, polished the dark wood floors, painted the back rooms a warm cream color, and assembled massive dark oak bookshelves that we bought from a local carpenter. During the renovation, we spent a whole afternoon going to a local hardware store to pick the perfect colors. Eliza wanted a bright, modern look, but I convinced her that a cozy, classic style would fit the quiet Northern District better. We laughed as we tested different wood stains on scraps of oak. Eliza was a force of nature. She would stand high up on a creaking wooden stepladder, her straight silver hair tied back in a messy bun, pointing a dripping paint brush at me. "Adrian, if you paint that corner as crookedly as you did the last one, I'm going to make you drink your own espresso," she would shout, her red eyes sparkling with mischief. I would laugh, wiping a splash of white paint from my cheek, and mock salute her. "Yes, Captain. I'll make sure it's perfect." I wouldn't dare anger the boss. There was no tension between us, no walking on eggshells, no fear of saying the wrong thing. It was easy. It was real. We spent hours arguing playfully over where to put the tables, what kinds of pastries to bake, and what books should go on the display window. One afternoon, the rain was pouring outside, gushing down the old gutters of the street. Eliza sat on the stepladder, holding an old leather-bound book she had found in a box. "Listen to this, Adrian," she said softly, reading a line from a 1920s poetry book. "In the quiet corners of the world, we find the pieces we lost in the storm." She looked down at me, her red eyes serious. "This line reminded me of you." I stopped wiping the table, looking up at her. The sound of the rain was a soothing background hum. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. "I think I found those pieces, Eliza," I said. On our opening day, the bell above the door rang, and a quiet, elderly gentleman stepped inside. He looked around in wonder at the shelves filled with leather-bound books, then walked to the counter and ordered a warm cup of Earl Grey tea and a fresh lemon scone I had baked that morning. He sat by the window, reading a poetry book for hours. Eliza and I stood behind the counter, watching him with quiet pride. It was our first success. We realized we were building a future. As I worked, my mind would sometimes drift back to the novel plot. The system of my delusion kept reminding me that in the book, Eliza was barely mentioned. She was a footnote, a childhood friend who tried to save the villain and failed. But looking at her now, laughing as she dropped a stack of vintage novels on the floor, she was the most real thing in my life. One evening, after we had finished setting up the main bookshelf, we sat on the floor of the empty café, sharing a single box of warm pizza. The rain was tapping softly on the window, and the warm pendant lights cast a soft glow. "Why are you doing this, Eliza?" I asked quietly, looking at her. "I pushed you away for years. I was awful to you because of Sienna." Eliza stopped chewing. She set her pizza slice down and looked at me, her red eyes serious and soft. "Because I knew the real Adrian was still in there," she whispered, reaching out to touch my hand. "And I was right. You're back now, and you deserve a life that belongs to you." Back in the center of the metropolis, Sienna's frustration was reaching a boiling point. The silence from Adrian was no longer just surprising, it was terrifying. It had been nearly 2 months since the divorce papers were signed in the hospital room. No calls. No letters. No attempts to show up at her studio. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his calm, smiling face in the hospital room, a chilling contrast to the angry, pleading face she had known for 3 years. Gavin was becoming increasingly demanding and selfish. He spent his afternoons lying on her couch, complaining about the movie studio's marketing budget, and pushing her to use her personal social media accounts to promote his failing indie film. She felt suffocated, but not in the way she used to. One evening, after a long, exhausting argument with Gavin about their public PR strategy, Sienna grabbed her car keys and slipped out of her penthouse. She drove through the rain-slicked streets, her hands tight on the steering wheel, the windshield wipers clattering a fast, rhythmic beat against the glass. The city lights blurred into long streaks of red and gold. She remembered a night a year ago, when it had rained just like this. They had gotten stuck in traffic, and she had been stressed, but Adrian had given her his jacket and made her laugh by telling silly stories. That memory now felt like a knife in her heart. She found herself driving to the quiet residential building where she and Adrian had lived during their first year of marriage. She parked, walked up the stairs, and stood in front of the old wooden door. She expected to hear him inside, perhaps crying, perhaps listening to sad music, waiting for her to come back. She knocked, her heart beating fast against her ribs. The door swung open, but it wasn't Adrian. A young man wearing an oversized college sweatshirt and holding a slice of toast looked out at her. He stared in shock, recognizing her immediately. "Sienna Carter," he gasped, his eyes wide. Sienna forced a polite smile, pulling her coat tighter. "Hello. I'm looking for Adrian. Does he still live here?" The young man shook his head. "No, he moved out weeks ago. I just rented the place." Sienna's heart skipped a beat, a cold weight settling in her stomach. Did he leave a forwarding address? Did he leave anything behind? The student shrugged. "No. The landlord said he hired a junk removal team. They threw away everything. Boxes of photos, old letters, gifts, clothes, he didn't keep a single thing. He told the landlord he wanted to erase every single memory of this place. He looked really happy about it, actually. He said he was starting a new life and didn't want any garbage from his past. He literally laughed as they carried the boxes away, saying he was finally dumping the trash." Sienna stood frozen on the landing, the cold draft from the stairs wrapping around her. He had thrown away their photos. He had erased her completely. The thought that she was garbage to him made her throat tighten. A sudden, sharp panic seized her chest, making it hard to breathe. She ran down the stairs, got into her car, and cried in the dark, the rain drumming furiously against the metal roof. She realized she had lost the only person who had ever truly loved her for who she was, not for her brand. She was completely, utterly alone. The memory of his warm embrace felt like a cruel joke, and the quietness of her car was a painful reminder of what she had thrown away. She drove back to her empty penthouse, the silence there feeling even more oppressive. Gavin was asleep, snoring softly on the designer bed. She sat in the living room, looking out at the city lights, feeling a deep, hollow ache in her chest. Adrian was really gone, and she had no idea where he was. The realization that he didn't care enough to even keep a single photo of her was a devastating blow to her pride and her heart. She couldn't understand how a love so deep could vanish without a single trace. The realization that Adrian had wiped out all traces of her hit Sienna like a physical blow. She returned to her penthouse, her mind spinning. The empty rooms felt larger, colder, and filled with ghosts of the devotion she had taken for granted. Gavin was sitting on the couch, laughing at something on his phone, completely oblivious to her distress. "Sienna, look at this draft for our joint interview," he said, holding up his phone. "I made sure they focus on my director credentials. It's going to be huge for my career." Sienna didn't answer. She walked past him and locked herself in the guest bedroom, staring at the rain against the window, her mind filled with a heavy, sinking dread. She realized Gavin hadn't asked how she was once in the last month. Sienna stood by the glass window of the guest room, clutching her arms, remembering a specific week a year ago. She had caught a severe flu, her throat burning, her head pounding. Adrian had cancelled all his meetings, sitting by her bedside for 3 days. He sponge-bathed her feverish forehead, brewed herbal tea every hour, and stayed awake all night just to make sure she was breathing comfortably. He never complained. He never asked for anything. Gavin, on the other hand, had packed his bags and checked into a luxury hotel the moment she sneezed last month, saying he couldn't risk getting sick before a shoot. The contrast was devastating, showing how superficial Gavin's affection truly was. The next afternoon, Sienna arrived early at the movie studio for a costume fitting. The hallway was quiet, the heavy carpet muffling the sound of her footsteps. As she approached Gavin's private dressing room, she heard voices inside. The door was slightly ajar, casting a thin sliver of warm light onto the linoleum floor. She stopped, her hand hovering over the brass handle. Gavin was speaking, his voice loud and arrogant. "Of course I don't love her, Victor," Gavin was saying, followed by a smug chuckle. "Sienna is a great actress, but she's high maintenance. She actually believed I was waiting for her all those years in my home country. I'm just using her brand to secure my 3-picture deal with the studio. Once that's locked in, she can go back to her shadow husband for all I care. She's boring anyway. I'm already planning a trip with the director's daughter." Victor's voice replied, smooth and calculating. "Just keep her happy until the contract is signed, Gavin. Once the movie is a hit, you can do whatever you want." Her ex-husband was a quiet idiot, but he at least knew how to handle her schedules and cook her meals without complaining. "You need to make sure she doesn't find out about the director's daughter you've been seeing." Sienna's heart dropped into her stomach. Her vision blurred, and the air left her lungs. She took a step back, her back pressing against the cold drywall of the corridor. The man she had thrown Adrian away for, the first love she thought was pure, was nothing but a manipulative parasite. She remembered Adrian's quiet, unconditional support. He had never used her. He had never lied. He would stay up all night to rewrite her lines, cook her hot meals when she was sick, and never ask for a single thing in return. He had protected her from the dirty side of the industry, shielding her from managers like Victor who wanted to exploit her. She had traded a diamond for a piece of broken glass, and the realization cut her to the core. She walked away quietly, her tears silent but burning. She felt an overwhelming sense of regret. How could she have been so blind? She had sacrificed her marriage, her husband's devotion, and her own peace of mind for a man who saw her as nothing but a stepping stone. She went back to her dressing room, locked the door, and wept. The glamour of her movie career felt completely empty now, a hollow shell compared to the quiet, genuine love she had discarded. Sienna spent 3 days in a daze, refusing to take Gavin's calls. She told Victor she was sick, but she was actually searching. She hired a private investigator to find Adrian. She didn't want to hurt him, she just needed to see him. She needed to know if he was really gone, or if he was still waiting for her in some corner of the city. On Friday morning, the investigator sent her a single address in the Northern District, along with a name, the Silver Oak Bookstore and Café. Sienna put on a large black sun hat, dark sunglasses, and a simple gray trench coat. She drove her SUV to the Northern District, a quiet, older part of the city where the trees were tall and the streets were paved with stone. She parked across the street from the café. The sign was a simple wooden board with a silver oak leaf painted on it. Through the large glass window, she could see the warm, amber glow of the lights inside, casting a cozy light onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. She leaned forward, her breath fogging the car window. Inside, Adrian was standing behind a dark wooden counter. He looked healthy, his skin clear, his messy black hair pushed back. The bandages were gone. He was wearing a simple green apron over a black shirt, grinding coffee beans and talking to a customer. He looked genuinely happy, his face relaxed and free of the tension that had plagued him for years. She remembered when he used to look at her with that same soft, devoted smile, but she had always brushed him off, too busy with her phone or her scripts. Now, he was smiling like that at someone else. Eliza walked out from the back room, carrying a box of old books. She set them down, and Adrian immediately walked over, helping her lift the heavy crate. Eliza laughed, punching his shoulder playfully, and Adrian smiled, that same warm, beautiful smile he used to give Sienna when they were alone. Sienna's throat tightened, a bitter taste rising in her mouth. She clutched the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. Adrian was smiling at someone else. He had replaced her. Sienna sat in her car, watching them work. She noticed how Eliza wore a simple, cozy gray sweater that matched her silver hair, looking warm and approachable. When Adrian accidentally spilled some coffee grounds, he did a silly, dramatic shrug, making Eliza laugh so hard she had to lean against the counter. Sienna felt a sharp pain in her chest. When Adrian had tried to make Sienna laugh like that, she had always scolded him, calling him childish and telling him to grow up because she was stressed. She had crushed his light, and now this silver-haired girl was celebrating it. She remembered how he used to wait for her outside the studio in the pouring rain, holding a large umbrella and a cup of warm ginger tea, completely unbothered by the cold. She had never thanked him, only complaining that the tea was slightly too sweet. Gavin, by contrast, would throw a fit if he had to wait 5 minutes for her in his warm car. The realization of what she had thrown away was suffocating. She wanted to open the car door, run across the street, and scream his name. She wanted to beg him to come back to the penthouse, to tell him that she had made a terrible mistake. But she couldn't move. She was just a spectator now, watching the life she had thrown away. She realized she had no right to step into his light anymore. She started the car engine and drove away, tears streaming down her face. The image of his happy smile burned into her mind. She sat in her car at a red light, sobbing quietly, realizing that the man who had once been her entire world was now completely out of her reach. Inside the Silver Oak bookstore and café, the atmosphere was always warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, wet streets of the northern district. The rich smell of freshly ground espresso beans, warm vanilla pastries, and old paper created a sanctuary from the rainy city. At 6 a.m., I would start grinding the dark, oily espresso beans, the sound of the machine a familiar hum. I would steam the milk to exactly 140 degrees, pouring a clean latte art heart onto the surface, while the scent of freshly baked cinnamon rolls and lemon scones filled the air. Over the next month, the cafe became a popular spot for the local neighborhood. Customers loved the quiet, cozy vibe, the rare books lining the shelves, and the delicious coffee we served. Eliza handled the book inventory, searching for rare first editions and ordering vintage poetry volumes, while I focused on the kitchen. We worked together in perfect harmony, a seamless team. One evening, after we had closed the doors and turned off the main lights, I was wiping down the mahogany counter. The street outside was quiet, the rain tapping a soft, rhythmic pattern on the large glass window. The warm pendant lights cast long shadows across the dark oak shelves. Eliza was sitting on a high stool nearby, sorting through a box of vintage poetry books. "Adrian," she said softly, looking up from a leather-bound volume, her red eyes reflecting the light. "Do you ever think about your old life? Do you ever regret signing those papers in the hospital?" I stopped wiping the counter. I looked at the dark wood, feeling the smooth grain under my fingers, then up at Eliza's face. "No," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. "I don't. For 3 long years, I felt like I was drowning. I was trying to hold on to someone who didn't want to be held. I was living a life that wasn't mine, constantly walking on eggshells. Now, I can finally breathe. I have this place. I have my own thoughts. And I have you. You showed me what real care looks like, Eliza. You didn't ask me to be a shadow. You allowed me to be a person." Eliza's cheeks flushed slightly under the warm lights. She set the book down and walked over to me, stopping on the other side of the counter. She reached out and placed her warm hand over mine. "I'm glad you're here, Adrian," she whispered. "You deserve to be happy. You deserve someone who actually sees you, not someone who uses you as a shadow. You are a new person now, and I want to be part of your future." She picked up the vintage book she had been reading and turned to a page, showing it to me. "Look at this paragraph," she said. "It talks about a gardener who plants seeds in a field that was completely burned by fire. Everyone tells him nothing will grow, but he keeps watering it anyway, because he believes in the soil." She looked up, her red eyes shining. "You're that gardener, Adrian. You've made something beautiful grow from the ashes of your past." I took the book from her hands, setting it on the counter, and looked into her eyes. The warm steam from the espresso machine rose between us. "I couldn't have done it without you, Eliza," I whispered. "You were my sun." I squeezed her hand back, realizing that my future was standing right in front of me, and I was ready to build it with her. We smiled at each other, the silence between us comfortable and warm. I knew that whatever happened next, I was no longer a villain in someone else's story. I was the author of my own. The following week, I decided to clear out the final boxes of my old belongings that I had stored in the café's back room. Most of it was old notebooks, tax documents, and clothes I hadn't worn in years. As I lifted a dusty cardboard box, the bottom gave way, spilling papers across the concrete floor. I sighed, kneeling down to gather them. Among the old utility bills and bank statements, a torn, yellowed piece of paper caught my eye. It was a medical document from a private clinic, dated 6 months ago. I picked it up, brushing the dust off with my thumb. As my eyes scanned the medical jargon, my heart stopped. The print read, "Termination of pregnancy, patient, Sienna Carter. Consenting spouse, Adrian Carter, signature forged." A sudden, violent pain exploded behind my eyes, far worse than the pain of the car crash. The walls of the room seemed to spin, and the concrete floor felt like it was falling away. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and my breath became shallow. The hospital lights, the car crash, the transmigration delusion, it all began to crack and shatter like thin ice. A tidal wave of hidden, agonizing memories rushed back into my mind, tearing through the neat delusion I had built. I didn't transmigrate. I was the original Adrian. The novel husband delusion was nothing but a reality-altering psychological defense mechanism. My mind had completely broken under the weight of Sienna's ultimate betrayal months ago. She had secretly aborted our child, the baby I had desperately wanted and loved, just to protect her rising career and her brand. She had forged my signature, and when I found out, she had blamed me for being unsupportive and obsessive, throwing me out of her life. The memory of that night came back with terrifying clarity. I had walked into our bedroom and found the clinic document on her vanity table. When I confronted her, she was packing her bags for a shoot, completely cold. A child? Now, she had scoffed, her voice sharp. Do you know what that would do to my career? The studio would drop me. Gavin's father would cancel the movie. You're being selfish, Adrian. I don't need this dead weight. She had walked out, leaving me broken, and the next day she told the media I was unstable. The car crash wasn't just an accident, it was the result of me driving in a blind haze of tears and despair after she told me she had aborted the baby and called me a monster. My mind had literally erased my own identity, constructing a fictional world where I was a transmigrator, just to save me from the sheer, soul-destroying trauma of loving her. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching my head as the tears finally flowed, the cold, devastating truth burning my soul. I remembered who I was. I remembered the baby we lost. I remembered the monster Sienna really was, and the love that had destroyed me. I knelt on the cold, hard concrete of the back room, clutching the medical paper to my chest, the sound of the rain outside seeming like a mockery of my grief. I found my old diary in the box, flip opening to pages from 6 months ago, filled with my excitement when I first found out she was pregnant. I had drawn plans for a baby room, lists of toys, and notes about being a good father. All of it had been crushed by her vanity. I wept for the child I never got to hold, shaking violently, my chest tight with an unbearable grief. But I also felt a cold, hard resolve growing within me. I was no longer the boy who begged for her love. I was the man who survived her betrayal, and I would never let her touch my soul again. The bell above the café door rang, a sharp, cheerful sound that felt entirely out of place. I stood behind the counter, my face pale, my eyes cold and dead. Eliza was out running errands, leaving me alone in the quiet shop. The afternoon light was fading, casting long, dark shadows across the floor. The door opened slowly, and a woman stepped inside, pulling back a large black sun hat and sunglasses. Sienna. She looked at me, her blue eyes filled with tears, her lip trembling. She took a step toward the counter, her hands reaching out in desperation. Adrian. She whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Please, you have to listen to me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, looking at her with a blank, chilling indifference that made her flinch. Sienna took another step, her tears spilling over her cheeks, running down her expensive makeup. I was wrong, Adrian, she sobbed, her voice desperate and hollow. Gavin, he was a fraud. He never loved me. He was just using me for his career. He was seeing the director's daughter behind my back, laughing at me. I realized, you were the only one who ever truly cared about me. You were the only one who loved me for who I was, not for my fame. Please, Adrian, let's go back. Let's start over. I'll throw away the movie contract. I'll leave the city with you. We can buy a small house by the sea, just like you always wanted. I'll cook for you, I'll support you. Just, please don't look at me like this. She reached across the counter, trying to touch my hand. I slowly pulled my hand back, out of her reach, leaving her fingers touching the cold wood. The movement was calm, deliberate, and utterly final. Sienna flinched as if she had been struck by a physical blow. Adrian, please say something, she begged, her voice rising in a panicky scream. Don't do this to me. Cry, scream at me, hit me, just don't look at me like I'm a stranger. I looked at her, my mind completely calm and cold. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow void. You are a stranger, Sienna, I said, my voice flat and quiet. The Adrian who loved you, died in that car crash. You killed him. And you know exactly how you did it. Sienna's face lost all its color, her eyes wide with sudden terror. Adrian, what are you saying? You remember, she whispered, her voice trembling. Remember what? She tried to play dumb, but her shaking hands betrayed her. I looked at her, feeling no anger, only a deep, chilling pity for the empty shell she had become. I remember the garden we wanted, I said, my voice flat. But I also remember the clinic. I remember everything. Sienna fell back, her breath hitching, her hands clutching her chest as she realized the truth had been uncovered. Remember the trip we took to the rainy hills across the sea, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Remember the small diner where we had dinner and laughed? We can have that again, Adrian. I don't care about the fame anymore. I've realized Gavin is nothing. I want you. Adrian's response, I remember the diner, Sienna. But I also remember you telling your friends that I was just a hanger-on who was lucky to be in your bed. You told them I was a stalker on live TV. You can't rewrite that. You threw me to the wolves, and when my mind broke to protect me, you signed the papers and walked away. Sienna stared at me, her face turning pale as she tried to process my words. What do you mean? She whispered, her voice shaking. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the yellowed, torn medical document. I set it on the counter, sliding it slowly toward her. Sienna's eyes dropped to the paper. The moment she recognized it, she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. How did you find this? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I thought you didn't remember. The doctor said you had amnesia from the crash. My mind broke, Sienna, I said, my voice cold and steady. I had to literally forget who I was just to survive the pain of what you did. You aborted our child. You forged my signature. You threw away our family for a movie role, and then you called me a stalker on live television to protect your brand. And now, you come here, crying about Gavin's betrayal, expecting me to comfort you? Expecting me to run away with you? Sienna fell to her knees on the hard linoleum floor, sobbing violently, her hands clutching the edge of the wooden counter. I'm sorry, Adrian. I was scared. The studio said my career would be over. Please, forgive me. I made a mistake. I want our baby back too. I'll do anything. We can start a new family, I promise. You didn't just abort our child, Sienna, I replied, looking down at her with absolute indifference. You forged my signature. You stole my choice. You stole my family. And then you called me a stalker to millions of people to protect your brand. You ruined my life, and when my mind broke to protect me from the trauma of loving you, you didn't even care. You just signed the divorce papers and walked away. And now you expect me to comfort you because Gavin did to you what you did to me? Please, Adrian. Please, she screamed, her fingernails scratching against the wood of the counter, leaving thin marks on the polished surface. There is nothing to forgive, I said quietly. Because I feel nothing for you. No anger. No hate. Just nothing. You are nothing to me. The cafe door opened, and Eliza walked in, carrying a bag of groceries. She stopped, looking at Sienna weeping on the floor, then at me. I walked around the counter, leaving Sienna weeping on the linoleum. I walked over to Eliza, taking the heavy groceries from her hand. I smiled at her, a real, warm smile. Let's go to the back room, Eliza, I said softly, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. We have a lot of work to do. Eliza looked at Sienna, then up at me, and nodded, her red eyes filled with support. We walked away, shutting the door behind us. Sienna was left entirely alone, crying in the empty cafe, surrounded by the ghosts of her irreversible mistakes. She had chosen her career over love, and now she had neither. I locked the back door behind us, shutting out her cries. I looked at Eliza, who was watching me with soft, caring eyes. Are you okay, Adrian? She asked quietly. I smiled, squeezing her hand. I am now, Eliza. Let's start the prep for tomorrow. We began working, the warmth of the kitchen and our quiet connection filling the space, leaving the past where it belonged, in the dark. Sienna clawed at the wooden counter in absolute despair, realizing she had the perfect, most loyal love in the world, and she threw it away for a brand that was now ruined. The silence of the cafe settled over her like a shroud.